What's going on, fellas? Got back from the gym today. Boring bench workout, nothing worth filming, but we're going to keep the streak alive as far as posting every day for as long as I care to. You guys seem to be appreciating it, so I'm more than happy to oblige. Also, out of curiosity, I just want to see if it makes any difference. Here's a reminder to like the video. If you don't want to like the video, that is A-okay. I really don't care. I just want to see if it makes a difference and if it's justified how people say it in every video. But that aside, we're getting into our next installment of common beginner and intermediate mistakes. And I went over to Max's room and I told him, I said, hey Max, I'm struggling to come up with a common beginner intermediate mistake that has any nuance, any value that I can provide that's not just simply don't do this. Then the video is done, right? So I went in, Max always has great ideas for videos. He's not the greatest at communicating what to do or talking in front of the camera or any of that, but he always has great ideas. So I went over there and, first try, Max hits it out of the park. So we have a kind of a 2-for-1. The first thing that he mentioned, I agree with wholeheartedly, that he sees beginner intermediate lifters making the mistake of, is doing huge amounts of volume where on your accessory work specifically, huge amounts of volume where no one set is all that hard. Basically just accumulating potentially a lot of junk volume. If that set is really easy, chances are you didn't come within the needed proximity of failure for that set to be all that valuable. And people will hear over and over and over, because we're in a more evidence-based space year by year. People kind of become more aware that studies are a very valid source of information. People will dispel that to the masses even if they don't read the studies, and they'll hear over and over this idea that volume is the primary driver of hypertrophy, when it is more complicated than that. There are multiple drivers of hypertrophy. There's metabolic fatigue or metabolite buildup. You have mechanical tension has got something to do with it. Proximity to failure has something to do with it. So to say that volume is simply the driver of hypertrophy is a little bit of an oversimplification. There's a tremendous amount of volume to running a marathon per leg. If we just do your body weight per stride, there's not much range of motion and the load is quite low, but there's an insane amount of volume. But this doesn't pose a great hypertrophy stimulus, so this has to be a little bit more complicated than this. So what people will do is they'll just throw endless sets of junk volume at it. Which I think isn't the worst thing in the world if you're a new lifter and you don't know how to push yourself. If you have to pick one or the other, so really low intensity and tons of volume, or high intensity and less volume, usually I'd favor the less volume approach. But if you can't bring any intensity, you may as well do a ton of sets. So while you're learning to bring intensity and focus to a set, throwing a huge number of sets out there can be helpful, but this whole time we should be working on developing our ability to each given set to bring intensity. So one, the willingness and the intensity to push yourself to mechanical failure, just that stubbornness, that drive, aggression, attacking the weight, however you want to call it. That's what I would call intensity in this case. Obviously, intensity can also be percentage of 1RM. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're going to work on, hey, we're throwing a bunch of junk volume out there right now because that's all we've got. That's how I need to drive progression. But we're working on the ability with each set to bring intensity, meaning bringing yourself close to failure, and focus. I think it's always a balancing act of going hard to really bring the amount of effort needed to the set, and then the focus and the discipline. We'll call it discipline. We have intensity and discipline. Discipline is the ability, while you're fired up, while you're trying really hard, to not let your form slip, not let your range of motion slip. Still be trying to target the muscle that you're trying to target. Not forget your cues as you approach failure and the pain starts to set in. We need to be pushing these two variables to get the most out of each of our hypertrophy focused accessories. Always pushing that intensity pretty hard, always pushing that discipline pretty hard. While you're learning that, throwing a bunch of sets out there can be valuable, but people will get caught in this trap where they never learn those skills and they think the only thing they can do is just throw infinite work sets out there. Like, well, I'm still recovering. We're going to go from 10 sets to 12 sets on this session and 20 sets on this session, when really, as we get more advanced, we shouldn't need to throw more and more sets at it. We should actually be able to decrease the number of work sets, because the quality of each given set, the amount of stimulus we're deriving from each given set as we get stronger and we get more skillful at these categories, should come down a little bit. So that was what Max sees all the time, is people are doing these obscene amounts of volume on their accessories, and they're like, well, I'm able to recover from it. Well, chances are there's a very good chance that means you're not getting as much as you could out of each individual set. So fixing that. And then the other thing he brought up to me that he mentioned was how they're spreading all of these working sets through the week. Lots of beginner and intermediate lifters, especially outside of kind of more of the IPF scene, what they will tend to do is they will center all of their hypertrophy work for a single body part or a single muscle group into one session. And they will absolutely bury themselves. So it does maybe take a full week till the next session to recover and do the same thing again. Can this work? Absolutely. It's tried and true. People have done this for decades and they can get better. But 9 times out of 10, you're better off cutting that session exactly in half and splitting that across 2 sessions. There's just more opportunity for muscle growth. If we suppose that most of the adaptation from a hypertrophy focused session happens within 48 hours of the session being completed, then by taking a whole week to recover our central nervous system, our soft tissue, we're spending 5 days of wasted potential growth. So rather than hitting 20 working sets for a muscle group in a single session, then waiting till the next week to do that, it's better that you take half of that, put it at the beginning of the week, half of that, put it towards the end of the week. Don't go crazy and bury yourself on either session. That same total workload will probably result you in a greater sum hypertrophy, and it will negatively impact your other lifts the following day quite a bit as well, because you're not just absolutely burying yourself. So those were the 2 that Max had for you guys. I hope I articulated the first one a little bit well. I tend to ramble a little bit about that kind of thing. But as always, thank you guys for watching my videos. I appreciate it a whole lot.